there's different things that could be causing, their internet being slow, but it's actually the devices is having issues in other ways.
You're listening to Stimulus Tech Talk, a conversation based podcast created by Stimulus Technologies that covers a range of topics related to business and technology.
Welcome to Stimulus Tech Talk. I am Sherry Lip, the Marketing Director at Stimulus Technologies, and I am here with Stimulus Technologies CEO Nathan Whittacre. And today we are going to be talking about tech issues business owners might miss unless they are listening carefully to their employees. Welcome, Nathan.
Thanks, Sherry. You said something that everybody should hear. If you're listening to Stimulus Tech Talk for a while, Sherry is our marketing director, not marketing manager now. So the marketing team is growing, and new role for Sherry. So congratulations.
Thank you. I had to get used to saying it.
After 8 years now with the company, I guess it's hard to change, but it's gone from coordinator to manager to director now. So
Thank you. So I mentioned listening carefully to employees because we're not talking about when the server goes down or the a computer or laptop dies. Obviously, employees gonna go to IT about that. But we're talking about the things that employees might be even just saying around the water cooler or grumbling about because they've gotten used to it. You've been a business owner for a long time. Have you learned to pick up on things that employees maybe don't come to you about when it comes to tech problems?
Yeah, it's actually funny. Just 5 minutes ago, I was talking to a manager in a different department that was communicating with another employee in the company. And the other employee made a comment that, they were out in the field and didn't have a laptop with them. And so now I got to figure out, why that team member that should have a laptop doesn't have one. But I talked to that team member all the time. So I hadn't heard that that was an issue. And I think that's the problem is some people think, or just get used to the way things are working or, different issues that they're having and just assume that that's the way it's always going to be or it's always been. And so they don't say anything. So, some of the things that we need to keep a ear out for as business owners, systems that are slow, we obviously as business owners, we're concerned about productivity and want to ensure that our employees are productive. So, systems are running slow, they can't get access to what they need. They're using other software, the whole shadow IT, I use Grok because I like it better than Copilot, and the company uses Copilot and they don't authorize Grok. You got to, kind of catch on things that people are doing to maybe work around policies, procedures, or software that you have, or things that are getting in the way of their productivity. Like, maybe they need a faster computer or dual monitors or 3 monitors or 18 monitors. I don't know how many they need, but just little annoyances or productivity failures that they're experiencing because they don't have the equipment or the the things that they need to be effective in their positions.
And that brings up a good point. If an employee is like, My internet's slow," might it be something else that's going on besides their Wi-Fi or their internet connection?
Yeah, certainly. So if they're complaining about slow internet, obviously, if they're working from home, it could be their home internet service. It might not necessarily be the internet running slow, but it could be like, things like older hardware, their devices running with too much memory. It could be a security issue, which would be my biggest concern is things like malware or, there's these botnets that run on computers that are unsuspecting and they're running in the background and doing things that are bad. So it could be that their whole computer is slow, but they're just saying that their internet is slow. And we get that, because we have the internet services side of the business, we get complaints, oh, my internet's slow, but it ends up being their Wi-Fi, maybe they're on the wrong side of the house. If they're working in the office, maybe they're working in an area that just doesn't have good Wi-Fi coverage. It could be, again, software on their computers not working well. I mean, heck, it could be their batteries not where it's supposed to be on their laptop, and so the computer's running in low power mode, even if it's plugged in. There's different things that could be causing, their internet being slow, but it's actually the devices is having issues in other ways.
And is there a way you can tell that an employee could suspect that it's malware, or should they just report that something's not working right as quickly as they can?
Yeah, if there's any issues, they need to report it. Hopefully, if it is a malware issue or a botnet issue, that you have good security measures on running on the computer that can detect that. But there should be a scan done. Bring it to IT's attention, have them run a full scan on it, and see what's going on. And it's really easy to tell, like if there's a software package that's consuming a lot of memory or a lot of CPU usage on the device, that could be the culprit. It could be just low memory. One of the things, Windows 11 uses a lot more RAM than Windows 10 or Windows 7. So, if you have aging hardware, that's, 7 to 8 years old, you might be running mostly 8 gig of RAM in the system. Windows 11 runs a lot better at 16 gigs. And so, it just could be not enough RAM in the computer to run the systems, and they just have too many applications open, and the system's just running slow for them. So there could be a lot of issues, but bring it up. If it's a consistent issue, a replacement machine or just a clean wipe and reload of the computer is certainly justified also.
Yeah, and I think you kind of brought up it could be a knowledge issue. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong on my understanding of this, but it used to be when you shut down your computer at the end of the day or something, and then restarted it, that gave it the reset. But now you actually have to do an actual restart using the restart button to do whatever it does when you restart the computer, clear things out. But somebody was like, "Oh, you haven't restarted your computer in 72 days." And I was like, "I do it every day." And they're like, "No, you actually have to hit the restart button. You can't just shut it down and then turn it back on."
Yeah, so most computers, modern laptops especially, go into standby mode if you just like shut the cover, and everything's still running in the background. And computer systems used to, if you shut the cover, would eventually just drain down the battery, but now it's a lot better. Something that Apple did really well on the Mac OS is, the standby mode is really, really efficient. But yeah, I actually had the problem on my device the other day that some of the programs were running really sluggish, and I went into the activity monitor and found that, one piece of software was consuming, two-thirds of my available RAM, but it shouldn't have been. So a quick reboot fixed the problem, and it hasn't been an issue since. So actually, selecting restart is, an important part. And when the systems are doing updates, they often reboot. But the issue is if you have like applications open that don't have documents that are saved, it will stop the system from rebooting effectively unless your IT has it set to not care about that lockup and force the shutdown, which sometimes you can do that. But it is important to periodically reboot your computer because that can speed things up considerably.
So when employees are complaining about or talking about, password issues or login issues, what should employers be taking note of there?
Well, one thing to hear about is like, oh, I have my favorite password and I use it everywhere, but now you're making me change it all the time, like every 90 days, and I can't keep track of my password. So I created a spreadsheet for him or keep it on a post-it note. That would be something you'd want to be cautious about. And, really, in that instance, I think employers now should be providing a password manager to the employees because everybody has so many passwords that they need to log into so many different sites. And from a security standpoint, you should have a different password on every site. The other complaint that we get from a login standpoint is they get frustrated with multi-factor authentication, or they share the MFA with other people. So that just requires some training around the importance of MFA and keeping those codes secret and not allowing anybody else to use them. So no shared passwords. That's something that and no shared MFA, something that needs to be trained to the employees. And really the best way around that is, getting a good password manager set up and making it easy to use so that, people can create passwords that are unique on every site and even store MFA credentials in that password manager. So it's one place to go for all the MFA needs.
And we did a webinar not too long ago about somebody being logged into a system, hacker being logged into a system hidden for a long time. Is there something that employees might notice that they don't realize is a problem, but a cybersecurity problem, but they see other types of problems? I guess that there's the slow computers, but anything else?
Yeah, I think if you're looking for issues from a cybersecurity standpoint, you might end up with like folders that are hidden or maybe emails that come in and then disappear quickly. In that case, what's happening is the hacker has put some type of filter on the email account that's moving those emails over to a hidden folder. And so if you have like periodically you're hearing that, oh, I sent you that email, and then you can't find it in junk or deleted items, have your IT company look through in the back end if there's any filters that are set up that are moving emails over to hidden folders. And a lot of that configuration happens in the background. So the hackers are using what are called PowerShell settings that are going into the back end and creating those rules that you can't see in Outlook. So you have to have IT look at it and see if there's any strange rules that are set up. So if you have any weird email glitches or issues like missing emails, folders that disappear, or emails that are disappearing, have IT look for those hidden rules that might be moving those emails into an area that the hacker doesn't want you to see that communication, and they're replying to those emails and talking to your customer or vendor through your email. So that's the way that you would report, or that they use the email to be suspicious or do suspicious work without you knowing.
And how might these unfixed tech problems that employees start to live with or maybe develop workarounds for, which we can probably get to a little more in a second, but how does that affect productivity and the morale of the employees if they're not getting addressed?
That's a big question. So, employees, most of them spend every day and every minute of their work behind the computer. And if the system is not running well, if it's slow, it's not just productivity issues. They're going to get frustrated with their job. And I've heard it so many times that, especially when we go and look at companies from a prospect standpoint, we're often not dealing with the owner initially. We're dealing with like an office manager or maybe some staff. And just hearing that, hey, my our computers are just slow. It takes a long time to get responses on fixes. We're down a lot. Employees sitting idle, things like that. Not they're just not being not productive, but they might be looking for other jobs because they don't feel like they're providing a good service to the company, and then they're just frustrated with the work that they're doing. So it could cause high turnover inside your company if you're having a lot of IT issues in the business.
So when employees are thinking about workarounds, we mentioned like maybe using some shadow AI or something like that. But what other kinds of workarounds might employees be doing to get around these problems?
Well, I'll share a story, and I shared this in my book. And this is probably my biggest concern for companies is if you're not providing the right tools, especially the right software to your employees, they're going to figure out a way to still do their work that's demanded of them. And so the story I shared in my book, this was from a long time ago. Company that we consulted with fixed this issue. One of the employees had a full license for Adobe Acrobat, and other employees needed access to Acrobat, but the company didn't want to buy it. And so they ended up sharing the same license key and figuring out how to get it installed on more than half the computers in the office. And that went on for a couple of years. They had these licenses that were shared among their employees because the company didn't want to pay for this expensive license. And what ended up happening is a disgruntled employee left, reported him to the Business Software Alliance, and the BSA came in and audited their company, and the fines were about $250,000 for all this unlicensed software. And they paid the fines because if you don't pay the fines, then the company will bring a lawsuit against the business. And so it's kind of like a voluntary fine that goes to compliance. And that's, if employees are doing these workarounds, it can cost, significant amount of money to the business if especially if they're using software that's unlicensed. The other issue is I think that, and that was quite a few years ago when the cloud wasn't as big a deal, but now with like AI and cloud computing, I think the bigger issue now is data vulnerabilities. Like if you're using software that isn't authorized, may not have the same security posture as the rest of your systems, there's a high potentiality for data leak. An example I read about in the news this week was a developer was using some AI software and linked it to the production database inside the company. and the AI system, the software that they were writing, wiped out both the production and backup databases of their system, and it all the data was gone. I was commenting with a couple of other IT guys about this, and one of them said, "Well, I could write a country song about how we didn't care about our data until it was gone."
You don't miss your data till it's gone, like a sad old country heartbreak song. You think you're fine riding all alone till the silence hits your telephone.
But yeah, I mean that's the problem is employees are going to figure out how to do what they're responsible for, and if you're not giving them the tools necessary, it could lead to fines, it could lead to data loss, it could lead to a hack, ransomware. There's a lot of things that could happen if there's that shadow IT that's going on in the background for the employees to get the work done that they want to do.
So, kind of to bring it all together, what do you think causes these gaps in, employees not reporting these issues to the right channels and employers kind of being unaware or turning a blind eye to these problems?
It's a company culture issue. If you have the culture of understanding that technology is really helping the business operate, having good IT isn't just there to fix problems. It's really to prevent things from happening, but it's also there to increase the productivity and the workflow of the business. All of our companies, all of our businesses are so tied to how well the technology works inside the businesses. Business owners can't ignore IT issues and go cheap on them and have a successful business in this day and age. Companies that do that are definitely far behind. And you look at like even large enterprises that have had issues, a lot of the complaints are around IT. I remember a few years ago, Southwest Airlines had a major meltdown of their scheduling for the holidays, and there was tens of thousands of people that had their flights canceled, and the complaint from the pilots and the crews were that the IT systems that were built for scheduling the planes, pilots, and crews were very antiquated and could not keep up with the demand of the size of the company that it had grown to. And so when you have even in large enterprises, a company doing billions of dollars in revenue can have these issues. If you're not making the investments in their IT infrastructure, software, and workflows of the business, it can bring the company to a halt, cause employees to leave, and cause significant reputation damage to the business. I remember that particularly about Southwest, and it's always a concern of mine as I'm flying, if my plane's going to be there on time. And Southwest generally has a really good reputation, and I think they've made a huge investment on fixing that problem. But for a few years it was, you read a news story and it was immediately referenced back to Southwest problems. So you don't want to be in the newspaper of not being able to do good work because you haven't invested effectively in IT. And so I think as business owners we have to recognize how much good technology can help a business, and not investing in that technology can really hurt. And balancing the return on investment with making sure that it's increasing the productivity in the business, and you're getting the business outcomes that you expect out of the investments. So it's always balanced, but good IT makes good businesses.
Yeah, I mean, I just saw a joke about that, about Southwest and that the other day. So it's a hard thing to live down when you get that kind of reputation. So you
Yeah, I
don't
think it
want
was
that.
5 years ago that that happened. So 5 years later, people are, and that was the thought that we do these generally unscripted, and that was the thought that came to my mind when you asked that question, is Southwest, and it's 5 years ago now.
So how can we help businesses with these kinds of problems? Because a lot of people think about the crisis, but how do we help with these kinds of problems?
One of the biggest things that a business can do is put together a good forecast and budget for their IT. So, that's one of the things that our technical account managers do with our clients, is sit down and say, okay, this is where we're at. This is the hardware you have. These are the applications that you're running. These are the machines that are having issues. And then we put a plan together and say, okay, over the next, 12 months or 24 months, we need to replace these computers. Maybe these employees need, new larger monitors. We need to fix or replace aging networking equipment. So, having a good technical account manager working with with the clients and the business owners and translating those into, business results is the biggest thing. And so that's how we help our clients is taking these IT questions and turning them really into good business results.
All right. Well, do you have any last minute or last advice for business owners? You've been one a long time, like I said at the beginning, for as far as picking up on things that employees maybe don't come right out and tell you.
I think it's a balance, and it should be a budget item. IT infrastructure should be a budget item in your profit and loss statement. Somewhere between 1% and 3% of your revenues should be invested back into technology. So go back and take a look at that, see how much you're investing, and then see what the results are. Is if you do incremental increases in it, you shouldn't be spending 10% of your revenues on IT unless you're a technology company and that's what you do, but you should be spending probably in that 1 to 3% range, depending on your type of your business, and that'll help you be successful, and you'll get great employees that will want to stick around, and they'll be more productive and enjoy the work that they're doing, and tends to be a positive culture shift in businesses I've seen that have made those type of investments.
All right. Well, thanks, Nathan, and thank everybody for listening or watching. Please give us a comment if you have run into these types of things, or if you have a question, you can reach out to us, and we're happy to help.